Right, so good morning, everyone, and I would like to welcome you to this virtual President's visit to the Northwest and the Southeast. My name is Simon Taylor, and I am the Regional Chair for the Southeast for 2020. I would like to welcome our RTPI President for this year, Dr. Y Yang, along with our speakers who are Maurice Brophy, the Service Manager for Planning and Housing Strategy at Lancaster City Council. We have Damian Law, Planning Officer at South Lakeland District Council. Tom Ogden, a Director at Bloomfields Planning Consultancy. And Claire Tester, who is a Planning Advisor to the High-Wheeled AONB, as well as we have also got on the call here Rebecca Dewey, also from WSP. I do hope I've got that correct. This visit takes place to honour and celebrate World Environment Day, which is going to be taking place tomorrow, which is the 5th of June. And the theme of World Environment Day this year is ecosystem restoration, which will launch the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, which is a focused effort to reverse the degradation of ecosystems in every corner of the world. So we've decided to entitle this particular event Good Planning and Aid to Nature Recovery, where we'll be focusing on the pressures between development needs and nature recovery on our landscapes here in the UK. So why have we chosen this? Well, both of the Northwest and the Southeast regions have a number of diverse landscapes, both designated as national parks, but more importantly for this particular session, areas of outstanding natural beauty. These can include the Kent Downs, the Forest of Bowland, Chichester Harbour, Nidderdale and the Surrey Hills AONB. But while those are important, we're going to be talking about some other examples during the course of this event. As such, these landscapes, which are protected to conserve and enhance their natural beauty, must be balanced against the development needs for communities to live and work in. So the format of this particular event is that we are looking to explore two particular questions. Have we lost country from town and country planning? And how can good planning aid nature recovery? So the format of this particular event is that the panel have been asked to consider these two particular questions prior to the event, and I'll be asking each of them to give their opening remarks. We will then have a panel discussion led by Rebecca, who also is our Northwest Young Planner of the Year 2020, to chair that particular discussion and exploring those two questions further. And then following that discussion, Rebecca will invite Way to give us her thoughts on how good planning can aid nature recovery and to give us some thoughts on the discussions that have happened today. So just before I pass over to Maurice and Damian for their opening remarks, I'm just going to do a quick bit of housekeeping for everyone. Can I please ask that you put yourself on mute when the panelists are speaking and that your camera is off? This allows more attention to be focused on the opening remarks that everybody has. And I should also point out today that the event is going to be recorded and is being recorded and will be published on YouTube later today or early next week. We will be taking questions throughout today's event, so please do submit your questions by using the chat section on Teams here throughout the presentation. Likewise, you can ask your question in person when we get to the panel discussion. So if you want to do this, please raise your hand by using the icon at the top, and then Rebecca will invite you to turn on your camera and your microphone, and you'll be able to ask your questions directly to the panel. I would say also, please do get involved on Twitter and follow us on the various Twitter handles that we have. So at RTPI Planners, which is the national account, at RTPI Southeast, and also at RTPI Northwest. So with all that said, I'm going to pass now over to Maurice Brophy, who is the Service Manager for Planning and Housing at Lancaster City Council, and also Damian Law, Planning Officer at South Lakeland District Council, and I understand that they're going to be talking us through what they consider about those particular questions, but also a particular project that they've been working on together. So over to you guys.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Good morning, everyone. I'm Maurice Brophy. I work for Lancaster City Council, and together with South Lakeland District Council, we produced the country's first AONB DPD specific local plan. So my team and South Lakeland District Council's team worked on that for a couple of years, and it was adopted in 2019. I'll quickly today give you an introduction to our AONB and the DPD document, and then look at what impacts the AONB DPD has had since it was adopted in 2019 in terms of proposals coming forward. I'll look at the success of the DPD in terms of development control. I'll look at some of the successes we've had from using mini planning briefs, and I will look at how the AONB DPD can assist in biodiversity net gain. So first of all, where is the AONB DPD based? Well, the Arnside and Silverdale AONB is in the the northeast corner of Morecambe Bay, and it straddles the border between Lancaster and South Lakeland. The map on the right with the blue line going through it shows that approximately half of it's in South Lakeland to the north and half of it is in Lancaster district to the south. The principal town that's in South Lakeland is Arnside, and the principal town in Lancaster is Silverdale. It is in this corner of the bay, so a very unusual, unique environment, and you really have to make a point of coming here to see it, because you will never see it in passing. It's effectively a bit like a cul-de-sac. You've got to come and have a look. Lancaster district is also host to a significant chunk of the Forest of Bowland AONB, and the contrast between our two AONBs could not be more different. The Forest of Bowland is open land, open access land, bare hills, sheep farming, whereas the Arnside Silverdale AONB is the complete opposite. That's an overall shot, and those are some detail shots. And it's best described as being very Sylvan. It's an intimate mosaic of low limestone hills, woodlands, wetlands, pastures, limestone pavements, flat intertidal areas, and distinctive small settlements. It really is incredibly beautiful in quite a small area. The overall area is just 75 kilometres square. The population is about 7,800, and there's about 2,800 jobs. But half of that 75 kilometres square is actually coastal marsh and bay. So the area that is dry land is really quite small, probably around 1/35th of the size of a High Weald that we're going to hear about later. So it's the definitely one of the smallest AONBs. The AONB DPD was commenced about 14, 15, I think. And why we did it, why the two local authorities joined together to do this, is we were both preparing local plans. South Lakeland was preparing a land allocations DPD, and that was actually going through examination. Lancaster District Council was preparing a district-wide local plan, and we were in the evidence gathering stages of that. It became apparent to South Lakeland at the examination stage and apparent to us at the early consultation stage that the need to focus in detail on our joint AONB was something that was different from planning for the rest of the district. So it needed that kind of attention because of the quality of the environment, and we needed to give that attention to the community to make sure it was being understood, that sufficient detail was being looked at, and also because both the AONB is shared, so we have the same issues, the same problems, and it just makes sense to try and aim for having policies which apply throughout the AONB, rather than having, for example, an application for a caravan site being treated differently because it's 20 meters from the edge of the boundary. It's better to have a shared policy that would apply in both boundaries. So it made a lot of sense to bring forward an AONB DPD that was jointly shared, and we set about working on that. I'd say that it was possible and that we had confidence in doing that because there was mutual professional knowledge of the individuals involved in both teams. We knew each other, we trusted each other, we'd done a lot of previous joint working and duty to cooperate. So there was that previously established trust. And because there were only 2 local authorities involved, it was quite easy to make it work. Our other AONB DPD, the Forest of Bowland, it has, I think it's 7 local authorities involved, and I think that would be really difficult to prepare a joint document for. So some of the key outcomes for the AONB DPD were, I think I would focus on 3 policies of significance. We have policy AS03 on housing provision, and this says that proposals for new housing development of 2 or more properties will be supported where they deliver no less than 50% affordable housing, and it's only where this is demonstrably unachievable that a lower percentage would be acceptable. And that's quite different from the policy that applies elsewhere in the district. So we have a much higher expectation of affordable delivery. And the justification for that is that we simply have far fewer opportunities in a very high value area. So if we are going to release valuable, precious land for development, then we want to make the most of it in terms of achieving housing which will actually deliver for local needs, rather than achieving only high value housing for a select few. So that's a key policy. Another key policy was our key settlement landscapes policy. We have 43 public open spaces within the AONB area, but this policy AS06 also identifies a separate list of 27 key settlement landscapes. These are private areas of open space that make an important contribution to the character of the AONB and its settlements. And this policy says that proposals for development will only be permitted in exceptional circumstances, essentially where they appropriately reuse existing buildings or support established land uses. So there's a very high expectation of a bar to climb in order to get consent on these privately owned special areas. Also, the third policy area is AS11, which is on camping, caravan and visitor accommodation. And again, it's a very high bar that we've set here. And we've said that development proposals will not be permitted for new caravan, chalet and cabin or lodge style redevelopment in order to conserve the AONB. So basically, we will not permit anything new. There's also a policy that establishes mini briefs for the small number of allocated sites that we do have, which sets out criteria in quite some detail for what we would anticipate for allocated sites. So what have been the effects of this? If we have this is just for the Lancaster district part of the AONB, but if we look at the top line in 2016 and the next down line in 2017, those were the kind of application numbers we were getting prior to the introduction of the AONB DPD. And you can see for those 3 years prior to its introduction, really, we were getting round about 80 applications per year. Perhaps an average of 15 of those was for new residential. Of those, perhaps an average of 8 or 9 proposals were approved bringing forward new residential development, and we were getting an average of perhaps a dozen new homes being given consent each year, with a proportion of those being for affordable housing. And again, a similar kind of level of a steady trickle of tourism related applications. Since the adoption of the local plan, which occurred in March 2019, you can see that there seems to have been quite an immediate decline in the number of proposals coming forward. 2020 was obviously a very unusual year, so there was a little bit of a decline, but perhaps that's not unexpected given the impacts of the pandemic. But in 2021, to date, there's been quite a significant decline. So it's probably fair to say that it's possible that the introduction of our AONB DPD has actually led to substantially less development activity being proposed in the AONB DPD. So how have we been getting on with it? Well, I would say that its application has been remarkably robust, almost scarily robust in terms of the impacts it's had on the determination of planning applications. It's been quoted in a number of appeals already, and the first of these to take a look at is one that tests our policies on heritage, and the building on the left is located in the middle of the little village of Yell and Redmayne, which is absolutely beautiful. And there was a proposal there to demolish the existing building. And it's difficult to guess what age this building is. It looks like it's 17th century, but it's actually mid-Victorian. It's probably 1850, 1860, made to look like something older. And the owner wished to demolish it and build something quite ordinary looking. The council refused that, and that went to appeal. And the planning inspector was happy to pick up on the new proposals in the AONB DPD and supported the council in refusing that proposal on the basis of the AONB's DPD's drive to retain heritage and retain local character. So success there for the defence of heritage policy. We have a proposal here which attested the key settlement landscape policy, our privately owned open spaces. And if you look at the top right where the word Silverdale is, if you can see that, we have this quite extensive area of privately owned open space. A lot of it actually belongs to the National Trust, but this extensive area that does also bleed into privately owned open spaces. And if you look at the photograph, we have an area right in the centre, which you can see has come out of agricultural use really, and had already been subject to some activity on site. And we then had a proposal to build a rather magnificent modern house. As you can see to the left, I'm absolutely sure this would have been on Grand Designs had it been given consent. The council refused it on the basis that it was in one of our key settlement landscape areas, and that decision was supported by the inspector. So quite a success there for the AONB DPD, and we were pleased to see that in terms of retaining that privately opened open space. And I think many people would have been watching the outcome of that appeal. We also had our tourism policies tested. And as I said, our tourism policy does not permit any additional new sites to come forward. And that was tested in detail by someone who erected some yurts without planning consent. There was an enforcement action taken against them, and the inspector supported the council in taking that enforcement action and instructed that the yurts should be removed. They may be relatively low impact, but they are not within the developed screened footprint of an existing site, and nor enhance the landscape character and scenic beauty of the AONB. The DPD policy clearly seeks to specifically prevent new built development for holiday letting, and therefore the development is in conflict with the overall objectives of AS 11. Really quite robust success in defending those policies at appeal. We also have, on the positive side, I guess, we also are using mini briefs that are components of the AON BDPD for the allocated sites, and these set out using bullet points specific site issues, including landscape design, layout, heritage, ecology and access, and each is accompanied by a little plan. We're currently using one of those for an outline application on a site in Wharton, and this is a beautiful greenfield site that sits below Wharton Crag in the largest settlement to the southeast of the AONB, and it's a very rare thing. We haven't released many greenfield sites, particularly not of this quality, and we are trying to get the best outcome from it. So we've been using the mini brief, and there's been a lot of detailed discussion with the applicant over the years to produce something which is basically as good as we could get it. So that is coming along nicely as an approach, and a lot of it is about the detail. And in a way, it's kind of what we'd like to do everywhere if we had the resource to really spend time poring over the constraints and the opportunities on every site. So I'd say that generally the application of the AON BDPD has been really robust. Again, on the positive side, what can the AON BDPD do for biodiversity net gain? Current policies in the district-wide DPD and the AON BDPD do not generally require biodiversity net gain. We seek it wherever possible, and both DPDs make it a requirement in exceptional circumstances where mitigation or compensatory measures are required to offset harm. So it's things like, again, being positive, it's the installation of swift bricks, bat boxes, and a good choice of trees for hedgerows. We have helpful policies within the AON BDPD that help us achieve that. Once the Environment Bill comes into effect, there is a concern regarding small sites about how net gain will be accounted for and secured. But we have a really positive project in the background, which is the Wharton Myers project, which is being advanced by the RSPB. The RSPB is seeking to restore an environment, so it's a very appropriate key proposal for World Environment Day, and effectively a bit of rewilding. So we have an area of land to the southeast of Wharton, which is subject to flooding, was drained a long time ago, and is currently very poor agricultural land. The RSPB is putting together a proposal to bring that back into use for nature and as a local resource for the community to enable a better habitat for bird life in particular. They worked up this proposal, they know what they want to do, and they're seeking funding for it from any source possible, sometimes with success, sometimes without. And what we can do through planning is that we can direct money from development proposals to this site to we basically have a sink for taking biodiversity net gain contributions to put them into one worthy project. So I think that is a real success for our AONB DPD, and a real success in terms of having something to do, having something positive for ecosystem restoration. So we're pleased that that seems to be going in the right direction. So 2 years after adoption, how's the AONB DPD doing? How would we assess it? The overall policy of restricting sporadic development and focusing development at allocated sites is really working. We aren't getting random proposals. It will take time for value expectations to adjust, but we may well bring forward a higher proportion of affordable housing on the limited number of sites that we have. That's currently being tested with our Sand Lane proposal. The mini briefs are a really good idea, and all parties have a clear understanding of expectations. The final level of detail in these policies relating to landscape design and heritage is helpful, I think, in bringing forward higher quality schemes. The development management officers like the detail. Within Lancaster part of the AONB, there are few allocated sites, so there is a high bar for landscape, but perhaps insufficient opportunity for affordable housing. So we could conclude that there are many positives, but is the AON BDPD in practice being a bit too restrictive? Are we emphasizing landscape and heritage at the expense of facilitating a diverse and larger economy? I think those are the challenges that we are faced with for the future there. Does the DPD help keep the country in town and country planning? I would say it absolutely does. And I think it's quite interesting that the first Town Planning Act in the UK dates back to 1909, and that was a Town Planning Act. There was lots of reaction to that in terms of where is the country, and the country first appeared in an act in 1932 in the Town and Country Planning Act. And I would say since then that the countryside of planning has actually gained a lot of momentum and a lot of ground, and that's certainly facilitated by our AON BDPD. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Maurice. Thank you very much for that. And I will pass then over to Damian, please.
Hi, I'm just going to share my slides, so bear with me. People see the slide? Yeah. Right. Thanks, Maurice. He gave a very good detailed account of the AONB DPD in practice. I'm going to just offer some general reflections, really, having had the experience of being involved with the preparation of the DPD, but also maybe just some personal reflections as well. Partly to get people to start thinking about the role of the countryside and its future, really, but also its relationship with other landscapes, and how we need to, I believe, see it as part of a whole ecosystem. So we don't just see protected landscapes as something separate, or some needing some very different treatment, which might not be beneficial as a whole. So I'm just going to start with posing a general question, which is what images spring to mind when we think of the countryside, and are they those that we're about to see or not? And that's quite an open question for, and obviously people have their own views as to what they think of as the countryside. I've just got a montage here. These are photographs of the Arnside and Silverdale AONB, and as you can see, we've got country, we've got some rolling hills, we've got a lovely seascape outlook here. This is taken from Arnside, which is one of the key viewpoints in the AONB. And here we also have a nice image of a coastal limestone pasture. So we've got some nice rolling, sort of quite unique, I would describe it as farm hillside type location with scattered trees. And then here we have a typical, what you might call village scene. We have a church in the foreground, and there is some a house there, and again some nice pasture and farmland scenery. So I think probably as a child, this is probably your image of what you think of as the countryside. But I'd pose the question in all those pictures: where are the people? Where are the facilities? Okay, we've got a house there, but perhaps does it show you that the countryside is a community as well, or is it just an aesthetic piece of value that perhaps doesn't have the community element? And finally, there's another lovely shot, the seascape, which is one of the main features of the AONB. So some general thoughts about the countryside. So again, these are just some open questions. Do we share the same understanding of its qualities? Where is the value? Do we know what our countryside values are? And do we share them? Is it less relevant than the urban environment? And some may say yes. I think what I'm trying to do with these questions is coming back to, have we lost the country from the town and country planning when we're thinking about planning? And this last question, is it inaccessible to who, and then is it therefore seen as some other? And I think this is just getting people to think about how they can make the countryside accessible to them and have some meaning. And so it may share the same value as maybe they place on an urban environment, and the focus on, as I say, the town rather than the country. And again, here's some just open questions. And what purpose does our countryside serve? So is it purely a resource for consumption? Some people may just see it as somewhere for leisure and play. Obviously, it provides a resource for food, material for building, obviously, and other uses, and fuel as well, energy. Is it a resource for nature recovery? Should that be its primary purpose? Enabling new and enhanced habitats and species to thrive. That's where some people may feel the focus should lie. Is it a place to live and work? As I was saying before, our countryside is also a community, and people have lived there for a long time, and work there as well. Increasingly so, people may want to choose to work in our protected landscapes because of changes in working patterns. So there may be some increased demand there for new housing and new facilities and places for people to work. Or is it seen as just a pleasant outlook or backdrop? And again, that's just going back to what I was saying before about its aesthetic value being the primary driver. So, the most important thing is how it looks, maybe, rather than how it functions. And then lastly, just, well, do we know? Some people may not have a clear understanding of what purpose the countryside may serve. So going back to the AONB itself, and as Maurice was saying, we started off recognising the special value of the AONB in terms of its natural beauty, and we really did. That was the premise for the rationale, really, of why we applied a different approach to the AONB compared to the rest of our district, and we recognised that it needed that sensitive approach, and also that there needed to be a higher bar set than other landscapes than the other parts of the countryside that sit within. So we took a landscape capacity approach, and that was a key element where really that drove the principles and objectives for the DPD, and it was, as a starting point, ensuring that decisions and how we considered options was mainly based on the effects it may have on the quality of the landscape. And we did some detailed landscape character assessments to guide our site allocations. And as Maurice was saying, one of the outcomes was this key settlement landscape, which is a new designation that we introduced to the AONB, and is new in England as a whole. I don't believe any other similar type designations within other AONBs elsewhere in England. And then just going on to the opportunities that protected landscapes may provide for nature recovery. They have a pivotal role to play in responding to the biodiversity crisis, and they really should be as I've said here, an exemplar gold standard, and that was quoted from the Glover report. And shouldn't just be seen as places to restore nature, but primarily should also be well, so I've got that the wrong way around. They shouldn't just be places to conserve, but they should be areas for restoration. And just quoting again the Making Space for Nature report, the concept of more, bigger, better, and joined up new sites. Well, as a starting point, yes, protected landscapes should be looked at probably first, really, to see what options and opportunities there may be to increase the size of what may be there already in terms of wildlife sites, but also can we create some new sites within our protected landscapes? But importantly, and I put this last point, we shouldn't just be creating islands that are not connected with the surrounding countryside, and we need to ensure that when we're thinking about opportunities within our protected landscapes, that we think of those linkages that can be provided to the town, and through concepts such as the corridors and stepping stones approach. So we connect people from the town into nature, into those protected landscapes, and then that may hopefully also maybe remove some of those questions about the countryside being seen as inaccessible to people, or protected landscapes as not really having any purpose for people. If there's a risk we just create isolated islands, as I said, that people can't really connect with. I think finally, this is just maybe posing some quite obvious conflicting points that we have to consider when we're planning for our protected landscapes and the countryside as a whole. And obviously we have those competing challenges that we have to challenges, but competing interests, should I say, that we've always got to balance when we're thinking about planning for the countryside. And obviously the rural economy and changes in farming practices and the interests of those who are working in the countryside. Then there were challenges in context of thinking about cultural heritage value of our protected landscapes, and what, if we're wanting to maybe look at changes in the landscape, and I'm particularly thinking about the Lake District National Park as an example, where the last point sort of alludes to it, where we are thinking of looking at how we can introduce and enhance new habitat creation and probably benefits for climate change. So there are some issues there around what type of ecosystems we should be creating within our protected landscapes, and how that might change the look and feel of them. And that links in with the point about the visitor and the tourist gaze appeal, where again it all goes back to how people value our countryside and what they would like to do. So we want to keep it in aspic and kept as it is, but that might not be the best thing longer term in terms of looking at opportunities around nature recovery, for example. And obviously we've got development pressures that come into play, and balancing with the interests of those communities who live in our protected landscapes. So I've just left it. The final point is changing the perception of what our countryside must look like. So this is my view, really. We should maybe move away from looking at from the aesthetic. I keep mentioning that, maybe how it looks, but important to look at its functional values and in a wider context. Mention rewilding here, and importantly also to not separate it out from the town. And we see both the town and the country as part of the same ecosystem, and not detached from each other. So I hope I've given some sort of posed some thoughts there for people to reflect on, and hope you appreciated that introduction. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Damian. And I think it's really good actually looking at it from both the very general point of view, but also from the impacts of how development plan documents can actually have in terms of managing the development pressures in the AONB. But I'm pretty sure we'll talk about that later in the panel discussion. So what I'm going to do now, those were our colleagues up in the Northwest. I'm now going to bring us down to the Southeast, and I'm going to introduce Tom Ogden, who is a director at Bloomfields, which mainly specialise in rural planning. And I understand that you're going to talk about some of the uses and some of the challenges around that. Over to you, Tom.
Perfect, thank you. Let me just try and share my screen with a bit of luck. Can you see my presentation?
It's not there yet, Tom, no.
Okay, here we go. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, there we are.
You're there. Perfect. Thank you very much. Lovely. Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me to be part of this discussion, or should I say, for inviting my colleague Beth Watts, who I send apologies on behalf of. So you've ended up with me, so I apologise for that, and apologies for trying to get up to speed with the brief, so to speak, and understand what Beth was going to touch on in her slides. So. Who am I? Well, this is me, and those bits there tell you a little bit about my qualifications. I have worked in rural planning for probably the last 13 years or so, where I've assisted farmers, landowners, business owners and residents of the countryside making applications for a whole host of things. And at Bloomfields, that is what I'm in the very fortunate position of being able to do. So, who are Bloomfields? Well, Bloomfields is a firm of chartered town planners, with one side of the business focusing more on the urban planning elements and the other side on rural matters. We're in a very fortunate position whereby we're associated with a firm of chartered surveyors called Lambert & Foster, a firm offering a range of property services, primarily focused around rural business, so preparing grant applications, making countryside stewardship applications, advising landlords and tenant law, valuing and selling land and property, etc. So, my co-panelist has already alluded to what people's perception of the countryside may be. And from my point of view, and relaying the views of many of my clients, it's not a static entity. Infrastructure is required to support farmers to ensure that they can manage our local landscape. Management of the landscape and farming are intertwined. The countryside is not just a pretty quilt of untouched fields. So, I see it as my role to effectively help people on a daily basis tell their countryside story, to help support what they are trying to achieve in development terms. So I thought we'd briefly look at the three of our most regular countryside stories we spend our time telling in my firm for rural businesses. So different regions will understandably have different stories to tell based on how their countryside is used. As we are in Kent and Sussex, I thought we should touch on three key areas relevant to the southeast. The first being top fruit. So for those of you who don't know what top fruit is, it's apples and pears. And don't worry, I spent 3 years at agricultural college and didn't know what top fruit was until after I left there. So the way that top fruit growth has had to evolve in response to market demands and price stagnation means that orchards and their associated infrastructure need to be larger, more efficient and modern. It is important for the general public to understand that for them to buy British all year round, the countryside needs to be worked. The cold stores, the tractor sheds, the pack houses and the processing sheds are all needed to get the product to market. We're extremely blessed to work with some of the largest fruit growers in the country, who, like many, are at the mercy of the supermarkets, who demand higher standards and accountability at low prices. Don't get me wrong, it's not always plain sailing. We regularly get objections to our applications, claiming our clients have ripped up old orchards, that the farmer is out at 4 AM spraying deliberately to annoy neighbours, that they must have left mud on the road, etc. The list does go on. But to me, what it shows is two things. Perhaps our farmers need to be more understanding of the reactions that derive from their actions, and perhaps that people's understanding of how the countryside is managed is lacking, especially if you want affordable food on the plate. And despite common misconception, farmers are looking at ways they can change their farming practices, but often it's about communicating this. This can be achieved through the planning system, and at Bloomfields we're always looking at ways to demonstrate the need for the proposed development, as well as providing the associated biodiversity benefits to support proposals. So specifically for top fruit book growers, this can mean planting of specific hedgerow species, woodland shords, wildflower meadows to serve as windbreaks, and to encourage the presence of good bugs, if you like, to kill off the bad bugs in the orchards, which has the consequence of reducing the reliance on sprays. This is catered for in each orchard and goes far beyond just planting a few trees. So the second area I wanted to touch on very briefly is soft fruit. So that's strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, etc. As with top fruit, the technology for the growth of soft fruit has evolved and primarily relies upon the contentious polytunnel. So to reduce the reliance on imported fruit, food miles and support British grown produce, technology is needed so that consumers can eat the soft fruit grown in or out of the traditional growing season. Polytunnels have been relied on for over 30 years and by many are seen as the enemy. Bloomfields has had great success in helping clients communicate what they are trying to achieve, allowing all the associated benefits in terms of landscaping and biodiversity to be provided. I think it is important to consider, especially in a protected landscape such as an AONB, that polytunnels are temporary structures. They do not alter historic field patterns and are removable without a trace. It has been heartening to have the support of our local AONB unit in understanding this evolution in the agricultural sector, or specifically in this agricultural sector. Polytunnel technology is further advancing through the use of renewable technology to heat tunnels, which will, in time, provide more fruit for all year round. The different style tunnels that are also available now allow for the use of drones, pests and disease control, and better plant health management. At a very simplistic level, I suppose I pose this rhetorical question. Should the requirement to grow healthy soft fruit for a larger part of the year, which incidentally gives more continuity and job security, be resisted because a view from a footpath, road or recreational activity might alter? So to my third and last issue that I just wanted to briefly touch on, agricultural workers' accommodation. It follows that to manage the countryside and farms, workers are needed. So it also follows that for efficiency, viability, sustainability, and not least for response times, workers need to be located where they farm and work the land. So that's in the countryside. There seems to be a common misconception that workers' accommodation either isn't needed, will lead to housing estates, or that they're going to create chaos for locals. And the reality is, certainly in my experience, that this just isn't true. This again highlights the need for education that the countryside is a working landscape and that every aspect of it is managed, even if it's hands-off land management, if that makes sense. So in order to stay looking like the countryside, people are therefore needed to undertake this management as well as grow and harvest the food we all eat. So to end really, I think personally I cannot comprehend that the country part is lost from the town and country planning element, more that the understanding of the countryside is misunderstood, or in many cases lost. And whilst there is a great level of support for development in the countryside, in the form of permitted development rights and local plans, I strongly believe that the country planning undergoes far greater scrutiny than the town planning element. Sadly, what I believe is lacking is the understanding of many planning officers and the general public about the purpose of the countryside plays for the country beyond just aesthetics, but in environmental terms, in social terms, in economic terms, and in terms of food provision. There we go. short, and hopefully thought-provoking.
That's brilliant, Tom. Thank you very much. And yes, no, it's been really helpful just to hear about how landowners are actually trying to utilise the land and things like that. So no, thank you very much for that. So we've heard the people that are trying to do something on the land, and we've heard the custodian, we've heard the people trying to control development on said land. But what about the actual custodians in the middle, the actual AONB units themselves? And at this point, I think I want to introduce Claire Tester, who is the planning advisor for the High Weald AONB. So over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, I'm going to talk to you this morning about protected landscapes, about the role of the AONB units and partnerships, and the key issues that we're particularly facing in the southeast. Next slide, please, Susan. So this is a map which shows the protected landscapes in the southeast, and you can see there the High Weald outlined in blue, and the way that it's cradled by the Kent Downs and Surrey Hills AONBs to the north and the South Downs to the south. I think what this map also really emphasises is just the sheer quantity of protected landscapes in the southeast. They cover about a third of the land cover, and obviously that's got to be viewed alongside the fact that the presence of London in that region and the economic driver that has for the whole area. So that really sets the scene for how protected landscapes have to operate in this area. So moving on to the next slide. Whilst national parks, the other type of protected landscapes, are planning authorities in their own right, the relationship that AONBs have with the planning system is a lot more complicated. So in the High Weald, we have 4 county councils and 11 districts and boroughs, and they remain the local planning authorities. They have a statutory duty to work together and particularly to produce a management plan every 5 years for the AONB. And to help them do that, they've set up a partnership called the High Weald AONB Partnership, and that partnership is supported by a small group of officers called the AONB unit, of which I'm one. So it's a partnership which has no statutory status in the planning system. We're not a statutory consultee, but we do advise both the local authorities, any other public body, and also landowners in ways that they can conserve and enhance the AONB. And I've just put up on that slide a few of the ways that we do that through mainly the management plan itself, through design guides, and through producing data of maps which identify the sort of special characteristics of the area. Next slide, please. So thinking about the key issues for this area, obviously thinking back to that map of the southeast, it shouldn't come as any surprise that one of our big issues is development pressure. In a recent report by the CPRE, the High Weald was identified as the AONB with the highest level of housing growth in England, and that's number of completions increased by 480% in the last 10 years. So that's 186 dwellings per annum back in 2011, gone up to 895 in 2017, and that trend has continued. Those include very large sites, and the photograph on this slide is of the largest, which is 600 units at Pease Pottage in the High Weald AONB, and that's under construction at the moment. And really what we've seen over the last 10 years has been an increased demand for housing, and perhaps a decrease in the weight that's been given to protected landscapes in that balancing act. Next slide, please. So alongside the development pressure issue is obviously the growing awareness of the impacts of climate change and the biodiversity emergency. And protected landscapes have a key role in addressing both of these issues. So this map shows the designated habitats in and around the High Weald, And probably the most obvious one there is the green, which is our very high level of ancient woodland. But it also shows that a comparative lack of protected habitats in the low weald, which is surrounding us. And I think that's important because, as Damian mentioned earlier, biodiversity, it doesn't thrive in islands. It needs to be connected. Species need to be able to move, they need to be able to migrate, they need to be able to spread their genes so they don't become too dependent on a very small pool. So the challenge for us going forward is how we start with probably the best of what we've got in the protected landscapes, how we cherish that, how we protect that, but how we grow that out across the undesignated areas and join up those assets. So that is really challenging, particularly in the southeast, where we're also contending with that very high development pressure. And I think the only way we're going to do that is if we actually use the same mechanism, i.e. the development plan, to plan both nature recovery and how to manage development alongside each other. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
That is great, Claire. Thank you very much for that. And I think it's clear that with colleagues up in the northwest having one of the smallest AONBs against one of the larger AONBs of trying to manage 15 different partners in that, it clearly presents some challenges in that. So at that point now, I'm going to welcome Rebecca Dewey to come in and start chairing the discussion. Rebecca, if you've only just joined us, is the Northwest Planner, Young Planner of the Year 2020, and we'll be chairing a bit of a discussion between all our speakers. So Rebecca, if I hand over to you and you can just explain how also people who are watching this live, they can come and contribute.
Brilliant, thanks Simon. Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me well. Yeah, great, I'm getting some nods. Wonderful. Really honoured to be asked today to help with this, and what a fascinating discussion. Thousands and thousands of questions I've been noting down as I've gone. And I hope, this is meant to be engaging audience. So if you do have questions, as Simon said at the beginning, put up your hand. I will then come to you, and if you could just pop on your camera if you're not too shy and just introduce yourself. It's always nice to know sort of where you're from or what perspective you're speaking from. So please do get involved. Now, the UN Environment Day tomorrow is quite exciting, really. Ecosystem restoration for the next 10 years. And I think the UN have been quite clever in thinking about, how we go about that, and thinking perhaps the next generation is about restoration of nature, which, speaking from a young planner's perspective, is really quite exciting, and thinking about how we can form policies to encourage that and balance and use planning, good planning. So we do have two questions today that Simon spoke through at the beginning, and I will come back and touch on them. But first of all, I'm going to probably take it in order. Maurice, if I can perhaps start with yourself. I was the award-winning DPD, can I just say? So congratulations on your award-winning DPD. Is probably really one of a first, isn't it, really, trying to work, across authority at quite an early stage. And, that year, 2019, we had the DEFRA 25-year environment plan. We then had later the Colchester Declaration that the AONBs should look to create nature recovery plans. But you were sort of a little bit ahead of the curve getting your thoughts together on a DPD even then. And I just reflecting on your DPD, do you envisage, is the nature emphasized enough in it? Are you thinking more about development and control rather than perhaps biodiversity enhancement or gain or connection? I just wondered if you could perhaps reflect on that for me. Are you anticipating making changes to your plan. And you also touched on your data and the number of applications, and that of course, personally as a private sector planner, that gripped my interest quite a bit. And obviously there could be a number of factors leading to that, but I'd appreciate a bit more of your reflection on that, if you would, please.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Yes, being the first in England and Wales to prepare an AONB specific DPD, we clearly were, in that going first era. And would we do it all exactly the same again? No, but I think that's the very nature of the work that we do. As soon as a DPD is adopted, or even before it's adopted, the circumstances have changed. The climate change agenda has moved on remarkably in the past few years. My authority declared a climate change emergency in January 2019, and we are now immediately reviewing our just adopted district-wide local plan. So we only adopted it on the 29th of July, and we're already reviewing it to take account of climate change. And I think there will be more of a focus on nature recovery and protecting environments going forward. And I think that's one of the areas that we would cover if we were to review the AONB DPD. But having said that, the standards and the expectations that we set in terms of development control in particular are so high and do make reference to all heritage that I think it's a robust plan. But I'd absolutely agree that we could do more to take account of the evolving expectation of nature recovery. And as I was saying in my presentation, we have an opportunity a really good opportunity to explore that. And I think a review could be exploring how we more integrate that opportunity and more integrate the expectation of development contributions being applied to such projects through a review of the DPD. So it's good to have gone first.
Yeah,
I'll admit it wasn't perfect in many ways. I hope Damian would agree, but we certainly learned a lot in doing it. And as a planner, and I'm sure many development planners will feel the same, as soon as you've done something, you'd love to do it again because you know what you would revisit.
Yeah, for sure. I think thinking about that for other authorities who perhaps need to think about joint plan working or working together, what would, open to Damian as well as you, Maurice, but what would your sort of top tips for, working together on in this sort of field be?
There's always that issue of timescales, and I think this is probably we were quite a fortunate place where we were at a point where we were able to take forward a joint plan that would sit comfortably with our other plan making processes. But I can see that being a real challenge for those AONBs where there are more than two authorities involved, and I think there are a few where you may be even talking 6, 7, 8, 9. I don't know, but I think that's just from a practical perspective. I think that's probably a challenge in itself. So I think that's and a governance as well. But obviously, the more authorities involved, the more complicated it would be to be able to navigate those governance procedures. So that's just an immediate reflection from a practical perspective.
Sure. And Claire, in terms of being an AONB unit, you don't quite have the planning teeth that both Damian and Maurice have, working, being local authorities. Would you say there's any advantages or disadvantages of perhaps AONB units looking to perhaps take an element of a planning control like we have with our national park authorities? Do you think there's perhaps space there, would that help you, do you think, in your endeavours?
In some senses, I mean, one of the things that was one of the recommendations of the Glover review is that AONB units be given statutory consultee status, which would certainly help both in the sense where we're not involved in things we should be involved in, but also in terms of the weight that local planning authorities give to our advice. I think that would help the situation. I wouldn't ever want to be in a position where I was trying to coordinate a local plan between 15 local planning authorities. I think that would be a recipe for disaster. But we are in a position where we have this advantage of being able to convene different parties and be seen as relatively independent from them. So we have been able to encourage our local planning authorities to work together to come up with compatible, for instance, biodiversity net gain policies. We have been able to draw the local nature partnerships into that conversation in terms of where those nature recovery areas should be. So I think that's the strength of AONB units is in our partnership working and our ability to bring people together.
Sure, that's really helpful. If I can sort of jump, oh, Tom, would you like to come in on that? Thanks.
No, I suppose I actually had the question I had really was for Damian and Maurice. Based on your presentation, you talked about a case study you had with the infill of housing development, and if I'm right in saying you said you had a micro brief that you were agreeing. I'm just interested, I suppose, of how you went about that. Is that something that you did sort of pre-planning as a pre-app process with the applicants? Was it something that application came in and then you said, let's talk? What was the process?
No, it was done in advance. There may well have been development interests at the time that the AON BDPD was being prepared, but for all our allocation sites, we have these mini briefs. So that was all the officers involved, and of course our AONB unit as well, looking at the sites and kind of working out in advance what the challenges were, and that's just been really helpful.
Yes.
So when development interest does come forward, that pre-thought that's gone into it is, I guess it is almost like a pre-app. You can see the kind of things that the local authority is going to be asking for. It simply takes time and effort, Tom. So it's something we could afford to do in that micro area, but I'm not sure of its applicability everywhere.
Yeah, I suppose I think it's certainly a great concept of and a way of engaging communication earlier, which is only a good thing in my mind. I suppose the thing I did note as well that you said it took 2 years, if I'm correct, to get to. Is that because it's just one of those projects that came on tap and then stopped, or is that 2 years of sort of backwards and forwards between yourselves and the applicant?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say the developer interest got explored, parked for a while, was re-explored. It's not unusual.
Yeah, fine. Yeah. Thanks. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Please do chip in. Tom, if I wanted to come to you next anyway, so you quite handily put up your hand.
Sorry.
No. I just am interested in how you're, all these requirements to bring forward nature recovery, climate change, net zero. There's a lot on your clients to deliver whilst also making a living, and not all farmers are wealthy top fruit or soft fruit farmers, are they? There are some more marginal farming, particularly in some of the lowland areas. How do your clients balance this need of their farmland, which is a resource that needs to be managed, and nature recovery? What sort of things do you see them doing, and how important is it to them? Is it a burden? Is it an opportunity? I'm interested in your observations of their views.
Yeah, I suppose I would say a lot of the farmers, and this is, I think, something that is generally forgotten, and through no particular, fault of the general public, but a lot of these guys are having to adhere to environmental standards anyway. They're obligated under their, many of them are under stewardship schemes and basic payment schemes, which set criteria to make sure that they are, if they're getting their subsidy, they're having to do something for it, and that if they don't do it, it gets taken away. So a lot of these guys are delivering on that front, and perhaps that's not seen publicly. And a lot of them will then be engaging in, additional stewardship, countryside stewardship schemes as well. So those are all things that they're sort of doing outside of the planning world. And so when it comes to, I suppose, the planning world, yeah, there can be a frustration, because then there's an element of, oh, what are you doing to justify this? Where are you showing your net gain in biodiversity? When actually a lot of the time it's happening. So that's something that we're always keen to try and get out there. I think it's certainly my role, and I'm sure many of you will feel the same, and colleagues in our line of work. I see that as my job. And certainly farmers aren't the best communicators. Don't get me wrong, a lot of them are getting much better, and they're having to be, and they often fail to talk about all the good things they do. Yeah. So I think that is a very important thing that they get out there. Equally, I think it's for us managing the client's expectation, the farmer's expectation the other way, to say, well, look, there's going to be a lot of requirements involved here. That we're going to have to jump through. So that often helps, if you like, the understanding of the planning journey. And I think, the sort of, it's the classic communication through the process, I think. Once an application's been submitted, having that understanding, I think there is, no doubt inconsistencies in the systems or frustrations in the systems, which then, if you like, give, and I'm not necessarily talking about farmers, but all clients, give them that frustration and perhaps undermine the credibility of the planning system. And we've got, I think, work hard to sort of get rid of those blips, so that people have more trust in the planning system, and then they are more open to listen to, and adhere to SPDs, and to want to engage with AONB units and all those things. Because at the end of the day, that's all going to cost them time and money. And that is an important factor that you've obviously touched on, Rebecca.
Yeah. But I know also representing clients, they see value in protecting their asset and to ensure that it's sustainable, isn't it? So it's just, I think, there is building a narrative, like you say. Claire, if I may come to you, if that's okay. You touched on, and also Damian actually touched on, and Tom in part, about these joined up assets. How many local authorities did you say were you are in your area, Claire?
4 counties, 11 districts and boroughs.
Wow. Okay. I mean, that's a lot, even if you have only one rep for each round the table, isn't it? That's a lot of people to talk to in one go.
Yeah.
But yes. How are you going about even thinking about joining up those assets? So perhaps you've got an ancient woodland and you've got 3, I don't know, you could have even 3 boundaries, couldn't you, even abutting it? How do you ensure that as a wildlife corridor or a stepping stone, how are you encouraging others to think about how they can join up and not just think of, well, the asset's in that red line, so it's that problem? I'm interested in how you're trying to tackle it.
The big conundrum with nature recovery networks at the moment is how much you look at it as, if you like, a theoretical exercise. So where are the designated habitats now? What would be the best way in an ideal world to join those up? And how much of it you approach from the other end of, well, where are the willing landowners who might actually be prepared to put their land into the mix for that? And it has to be done from both directions, really. So I think the the work that's being done by the Sussex Local Nature Partnership, by the Kent Local Nature Partnership, probably takes that more theoretical ideal world approach. And the role of sort of people like the AONB units who work with farmers day in, day out, is to try and put a touch of realism into that, and say, look, you know, yes, that particular corridor would be great, but we know that landowner isn't interested, whereas this one over here is. And you know, it has to be that kind of working relationship, I think. And also, I think there needs to be an awareness that just because an area isn't rich in nature at the moment doesn't mean it couldn't be in the next 10 years. So obviously, I mean, the big example for in our area at the moment is Knepp, which is just south of Horsham. 10 years ago, would have been a conventional agriculturally farmed estate with little nature interest. It's now probably the richest nature interest in the area. And you have to look at that and think, well, that could equally apply to other areas that at the moment just aren't on the map, aren't on any habitats designations. But all you need is a willing landowner and support.
So you're almost brokering things to try and pull people together. It's interesting. It's it's good planning. It's just a different form of planning. You don't necessarily have to have a policy there to try and pull people together, do you? Which I think's quite interesting.
You don't need a policy there, but equally you do need to, as I said at the end of my presentation, you do need to be planning nature and planning development at the same time, rather than at the moment where you've got local plans planning where the development's going to go, and alongside them you've got people planning where the nature recovery network should go, and the two things aren't really talking to each other.
No, I think, Damian, that was the point you were sort of making, wasn't it, in terms of town and country? They aren't separate, they're interdependent. I got the sense that was where you were looking to go with what you were saying earlier as well. You're on mute, Damian.
Excuse me. Yeah, I was just trying to make a general point about the separation between the town and country, and importance of not seeing them as separate entities really from the outset. But just going back to maybe some of the conversations about how we can ensure we sort of look at nature recovery at the same time as development. Obviously, with the Environment Bill coming in, there's going to be a requirement for these local nature recovery strategies, and we've been pilots here at Cumbria, which has been quite good to be involved in. And as part of that, we have been engaging landowners and particularly farmers. But it is so important that we think about delivery. I know it's always delivery, and we need to make sure that we implement whatever strategy we come. But so it's fundamental that the farmers are involved with in those discussions, and we're hoping the pilot work we've done sets us in a good place going forward, and also the concept of perhaps how we traditionally seen where net gain should be provided either on site or within the immediate vicinity, but perhaps we might have to move away from that if we're wanting these bigger and better habitats where at a wider, bigger scale, and I think this is where it's like remove these boundaries. I think it's part of the problem, fixated on, oh well, this is in our patch and that's beyond the boundary. Well, I think we need to just move the boundaries and sort of forget they're there almost. And I think there's still this mentality of, well, this is within this area, and that's that area there, and that's separate there. And I think it's all this kind of it doesn't help really in order to sort of maybe maximise what the benefits should be of any sort of decision when it comes to nature recovery.
Sure. I thought what was quite interesting when you sort of listed out all the possible purposes for the countryside, it left me thinking, perhaps do we expect too much of our countryside? And countryside's quite emotive, isn't it? It's almost not dissimilar to the green belt. We're all quite proud and passionate about our countryside. And I thought it was interesting that Tom also, as well as you, were sort of thinking I was surprised perhaps that there was agreement that maybe it needs to be seen more functional than just aesthetic. It's not just aesthetic. It was encouraging to see perhaps there was, general acceptance that
there was
that was the case.
A bit of a personal sort of reflection there, because I live in a protected landscape here in the Lake District, and I was born and raised here, and I see it as a community as well, and I think this is where that was me sort of maybe having a bit of a personal reflection where we don't see it as just something to look at. We live here and we work here. So yeah, that was me just sort of trying to make that personal point.
Right. I'm conscious I also need to give away some time for wrapping up. And Tom, you still had your hand up. I didn't know if there was anything. No, that's fine. Just on the town and country question, and also the good planning to aid nature recovery, I'll let Wei come in and perhaps sum up some of her thoughts. But I'm encouraged to think that perhaps the country needs perhaps a louder voice, and I've heard the louder voices here today. And I'm excited to think about how perhaps town and country could work better together. But thank you all the speakers, and I will hand over to Wei. Thank you, Wei.
Thank you, Becky. Hi. Thank you, everyone. Hi, good morning. It's really my great pleasure to visit the two distinctive AONBs in the Northwest and the Southeast. Actually, I live in one of the AONBs in Southeast as well. I live in Chiltern Hills. So I very much agree of what everybody have said. Because I think actually normally when we see countryside pictures, we always see this very tranquil. It's almost like a standstill picture of a place, but actually it's a very much, I think from what you said, it's a very busy living place. So we have people in there, we have farmers there, we have children growing up there, and we have lots of wildlife there as well. So it's a very living countryside. I think that's the picture we want to draw. It's very busy, and it's very comprehensive system. So apart from the say development areas, we need to accommodate the usual need of communities. We also need to think about ecology and also the farming industry as well. And actually now thinking about the climate change and everything, there is a great opportunity for us to think about a more robust, say, rural economy, because actually 70% of the people in the world, they want to buy local produced food. So actually there is lots of great opportunities we can grasp in the future. So today we come here to celebrate the World Environment Day 2021. The theme this year is the ecosystem restoration. So it marks the launch of the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, as Simon and Becky already said. So it's a global rally call to heal our planet. So facing the triple threat of climate change, loss of nature, and also the threat of pollution, I think the world must deliver on its commitment to restore at least 1 billion degraded hectares of land in the next decade. So it's like Claire said, apart from protecting what we have, we also need to create some more ecosystem and eco-friendly places. And the area is enormous. It's about the size of a new China. So we really, every corner of the world, we have to do something to really make sure we can restore that system. And yesterday, actually, a new report called Ecosystem Restoration for People, Nature, and the Climate was published jointly by the UN Environment Program and the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. So I strongly everybody in this webinar to have a look of that report. It's highlighted that humanity is using about 1.6 times of the amount of service that nature can provide sustainably. So this means conservation itself is not efficient, because we really have to think about how we can restore more areas to create this balanced ecosystem. So it requires urgent restoration. So including farmland, forest, grassland, mountains, peatlands, development lands, and the fresh waters. So actually, I think it's a multifunctionality requirement of every single land we have. So our farmland can not only be thinking agricultural purpose, we need to think about restoration and also thinking about regenerative agriculture. And also our urban land or our development land is the same. So I think for today, we choose outstanding areas of outstanding natural beauty. They are the areas with distinctive landscape and ecological character, diverse local economy, and rich cultural anomaly. So I think these areas should be primary areas for us to consider not only natural conservation, but also opportunities for ecosystem restoration. So it can only succeed if everyone plays a part. I think town planners, we play a vital part in this movement. I think today's discussion is very thought-provoking. Actually, from all the different aspects we talk about, so have we lost the country from the town and the country planning? I think we need to have a long-term strategic urban-rural integrated approach. If we consider the whole territory as one ecological entity, we will see the world in a very different way. So I think the climate change, climate emergency, and the biodiversity crisis are two sides of the same coin. So there are lots of linkages between them, and also they are related to the pandemic we are experiencing now. So if the right approach is taken, we can find a high nature and low carbon solution. So spatial planning can play a systematic solution to enhance the efficiency of intersectoral actions. And also with the empowerment of digital technology, I think we can play a much bigger role in tackling the climate and the biodiversity emergencies, as well as enhancing our health and well-being. I always try to explain. So if we imagine the earth as our human body, and then soils are our muscles, river system our blood, winds, and woodland are our hairs. So actually then the cities, towns, and villages are organs. So actually all connected to each other. So we all have a function. So whether it's a village or a town or a city, they all have their own function. So everything is a part of a holistic, integrated, and interconnected ecosystem. So what planning can play in this nature recovery? So if we think our country, our territory, or our earth is a human body, then I think town planners, we are doctors for our town and country. So I think with the support of our other specialists, I think, for example, we can produce a comprehensive and intelligent health check and then develop our local nature recovery strategies into our local environment improvement plans. So we can merge various single issue environment plans into a single hard-hitting strategy to put the environment at the top table. And at the same time, we can harness the health and well-being of our human nature as well. And actually, in this formal consultation response to the planning for the white paper, planning for the future white paper, the RTPI calls for the introduction of a green growth board to deliver joined-up strategies for climate actions, infrastructure, housing provision, and health and nature recovery. So if we can create, it's very much like what Claire says, if we can create a board, think about all these issues in a strategic way and put environment issues at the top agenda, I think we can really reform or think about our town country planning in a very different way. So, and also just want to emphasize that we really need a multifunctionality thinking and also multidisciplinary approach. And I think every piece of land, we have to think about different functions. So I mentioned we have regenerative agriculture. I think our town country planning should be regenerative as well. So maybe we could create a new term called regenerative town country planning. So I think our AONBs would be ideal places to start this thinking, have what I talk about, the long-term strategic urban-rural integrated approach, which considers the whole territory as one ecological entity. So finally, thank you so much for the regional committees and our chairs and the speakers and everyone joined today. And also a very special thank you to our regional coordinators, Susan and Beverly, to make this visit happen. I really very much enjoyed my visit. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you very much, Wayne. No, that's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the Northwest and the Southeast to hear this really fascinating discussion. I mean, personally, I never really seen myself as a doctor in the world of nature and in the environments that we live in, but I think I'm going to be taking that away, and I think I might be using that on a card somewhere potentially. So yeah, I think everyone is one of the main takeaways for me particularly is it has to be a collaborative approach and how things cannot be conducted in silos, whether that be two local authorities getting together to come up with a strategy, or whether it is one organisation trying to manage a whole plethora of stakeholders, local environment partnerships, landowners, etc., to be involved in that. I think it's really important that a strategic, collaborative approach needs to be taken to go forward on that. So on that note, I think I shall call it there. I want to thank all of our speakers, Maurice, Damian, Tom, and Claire, for their insightful views on that. I want to thank Rebecca for chairing such a fantastic panel discussion in the middle of that, and of course I want to thank you, Wei, as well for coming along for this visit. And I hope that in the latter half of the year, fingers crossed, we'll all get to meet each other in person as well. So thank you very much, everyone, and do remember to let us know what you thought about this particular session on Twitter and your other social media feeds, and we shall see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.